A couple of years ago, I worked for a Commonwealth Government organisation which had just gone through 4 successive years of budget cuts. These cuts were previously dealt with by reducing costs associated with property, leasing, IT, as well as some staff restructuring and reductions where absolutely necessary. The organisation, when it had first come together, had just over 7,500 staff, and by the end of the 4th year was down to 5,500 staff. Year 5 brought further cuts, and unfortunately these cuts were forecast to be much more significant than previous years. The cuts were made up of a 4% efficiency dividend and a 20% reduction in capital budget, plus a further 9% efficiency required to support the new enterprise agreement over the following 3 years. All told, this meant an approximated further 20% reduction for the organisation. In previous years, to manage the funding cuts, senior management had applied a consistent reduction to middle management's budgets of 5 to 10%, and had expected managers to figure out how to make this work for themselves locally. While this approach was somewhat effective and low cost, senior management had received a lot of angry and negative complaints on how this was being implemented and the impact it was having on staff. Some middle managers were much better at managing this than others, and as a result, there was significant confusion being created throughout the organisation as messaging was disjointed, timing was unknown, sense of urgency was mixed, and there were some areas claiming the cuts weren't meant for them and their portion should be applied elsewhere. At the time, in the most recent APS-wide survey, which is conducted every 2 years, staff had rated the organisation extremely poorly on both staff engagement and organisational performance. Staff engagement is judged on questions that go to how staff feel about the organisation as a place to work, while organisational performance goes to how the organisation manages change.
With a seemingly deflated morale within the organization and a need to address the 20% cut, senior management decided to appoint one of their very senior members to deliver this initiative for the organization with a mandate to develop an innovative approach to implement these reductions, which included effective and timely two-way communication with all staff. To help with this, the appointed senior manager decided to form a steering committee which consisted of himself, a senior representative from each of the 7 main parts of the organization, plus the CFO, Chief Communication Officer, and Senior HR Advisor. The key purpose of the steering committee was to agree on a methodology to implement the funding cuts and to help guide the change, engage the respective areas, and be active in communicative, consistent messages to their colleagues and line areas staff throughout the journey. In addition to the steering committee, the senior manager established a project team to manage the logistics, contracts, and communication for the project. The project team met on a weekly basis to monitor the progress of the project, review the direction, and ensure each step was being implemented. The project team provided regular updates to the senior leader and steering committee and developed and managed a communication strategy to ensure staff were informed on what was happening with the funding cuts.
The steering committee considered various approaches to implementing the budget cuts and agreed on a crowdsourcing methodology which would seek to engage staff in the process. The plan was to undertake a series of workshops to assist each area to talk about how they could work more effectively together and to empower them to change practices that would allow them to continue to deliver key priorities within reduced resources and budget. Members of the project team collaborated with a consulting company to design a half-day workshop that outlined the fiscal challenge, was structured and inclusive, and would be consistently repeatable across the organization. The steering committee agreed to pilot 4 work areas to see how effective the workshop would be. In addition, the steering committee agreed that they would also pilot the workshop themselves to ensure they had a hands-on experience of what the workshop would entail should they endorse the process across the organization. All 5 pilots were hugely success, and all steering committee members were very optimistic as to how this would be received by the organization. The steering committee agreed that the workshop would be a key focus for an upcoming senior leadership forum where concept would be introduced to all senior leaders and middle managers. At the forum, the organization's CEO emphasized the importance of leadership throughout the process and strongly endorsed the upcoming workshop as a way of supporting line areas during these difficult times. Following the forum, CEO addressed all staff to brief them on the fiscal challenges facing the organization and explained the workshop process that was about to commence. Over 100 workshops were conducted during a 4-week period. Each work area was provided with a short report outlining the key opportunities and challenges suggested by the workshop participants. During implementation, the senior manager was extremely engaged and asked facilitators to provide feedback to him directly after each workshop, pointing out any highs or lows so that he could put forward good ideas to colleagues or address issues immediately.
These workshops generated over 9,000 individual ideas on how the organisation could reduce costs. Many related directly to local practices, however a number of themes emerged that needed to be addressed from an organisational perspective. To name a couple: improved corporate functions, better delegation of tasks, improved use of existing IT capabilities, and reconsidering legacy practices, for example reporting processes put in place for previous governments that were no longer needed. Overall, this initiative was a huge success, with the primary objective of a significant reduction in funding delivered by the nominated date. The work undertaken through this process supported decisions into future years, and the methodology was used time and time again to unpack projects where crowdsourcing was important. From a change perspective, there were two main indicators that this project was successful. Firstly, at the time, both management and staff provided feedback to the project team to say they felt empowered during the change, and that the change had been a catalyst for staff at all levels to have difficult conversations about inefficiencies within their work areas. Secondly, in the next APS-wide survey, which was conducted later that year, the organisation, irrespective of the cuts, showed a significant increase in both staff engagement and participation. In fact, with further analysis, these positive results were found to be higher than all of the past 3 APS-wide surveys, one of which was prior to any funding cuts at all for the organisation. Independent evaluation of this change and the leadership, teamwork and motivation required to make it successful resulted in the organisation winning an Australian Business Award for Innovation and being nominated for a Prime Minister's Award for Excellence in Public Sector Management. From start to finish, the senior manager and the steering committee guided the project and were strongly supportive of and had confidence in the expected outcomes being delivered. This, combined with a sound methodology, buy-in from various levels of stakeholders and a high-performing project team, were the most important factors in contributing to the initiative's success.